Welcome back, folks. I'm Frizz, and today I'd like to take some time to talk about smart targeting and really what on earth smart targeting is in Pathfinder 2e, since it's a term I just came up with. Not every ability or spell is always going to be super effective on every creature, and figuring out when to use which spell or ability is a pretty important part of playing a character optimally in 2e. So let's break it down and see exactly what I mean by that, right? So effectively, everything in Pathfinder 2e has multiple layers of defense, and choosing which one to target is going to vastly affect how effective you're going to be. The most obvious defense, of course, is probably going to be armor class, since it comes up the most often. Especially if you're a martial character, making an attack versus your target's armor class is just, super common. Unlike types of defenses, which are basically just gonna be saving throws, which we're talking about later, AC doesn't really vary much between different creatures. Yeah, it'll still vary some, but in my experience, for creatures of around the same level, they're going to have around the same AC, and it's not going to vary as much as saving throws. This is, of course, excluding exceptions like oozes and zombies. However, there are tons of ways to make attacks that target AC more effective, way more than there are ways to reduce enemy saving throws. For example, you can always just make someone flat-footed and then you hit if you roll too lower on your attack. There are tons of ways to make hitting AC easier in the game, which is good because probably every single class in the game is going to be making attacks versus AC. I guess if you had to declare one way of doing it, attacking a target via AC is the quote-unquote default way of targeting someone in 2e, which is probably why AC doesn't vary as much, but there are also more ways to directly interact with it. But it isn't the only way, and you really shouldn't consider it as being always the best option or always the only way of targeting a creature. After all, saving throws exist, and often targeting a particular saving throw can be massively more effective than simply trying to hit their armor class. This is because AC is normally associated with, just dexterity and armor, where saving throws are affected by a wide variety of different effects. For example, an elephant's reflex DC is 2 lower than their armor class. I know that directly comparing armor class with saving throw DCs isn't a perfect comparison, but it does help get the point across that targeting an elephant with a spell or an ability that targets reflex DC or reflex saves is probably going to be a little bit more effective than trying to hit its armor class. This is even more apparent when you compare an elephant's reflex save and its fortitude save. The fortitude save is 7 higher, so you're way more likely to succeed if you target an elephant's reflex DC over its fortitude. Obviously, this isn't just restricted to elephants. Practically every single creature in 2e has high and low saving throws, and if you can target someone's weakest defensive ability, then you can dramatically improve the success rate of your abilities and spells. You can't just use the same type of spell over and over again in every situation, and expect it to always be around the same effectiveness. You really do have to keep your targets in mind whenever you're fighting them. As an example, if you're fighting a creature and you want to try and do some damage to them with a cantrip in particular, you could always just cast your favorite one. But if you want to be a little bit more likely to get results, you could try and guess what their worst defensive quality is. If you think it's AC, then try and cast Produce Flame. If you think their worst save is Fortitude, then try Chill Touch. And if it's Reflex, then Electric Arc is literally always going to be good. To extend the example, for the sake of the example, if you think that a creature's weakest save is Will, then you could cast Daze on them. The downside to that, of course, being that Daze kinda sucks, so you might be better off targeting their second worst defensive quality. But that doesn't exactly always apply, especially once you start using actual spell slots, where Will saves can be very important for enemies, and just really, really strong spells that target Will. And yeah, just pick whatever targets what you believe is the enemy's lowest save. This is something that is essential to keep in mind, especially whenever you're going to be selecting what spells you're going to have access to as a spellcaster. If you just end up grabbing spells that target armor class or require reflex saves, then against tons of enemies, you might just not have a good way to affect them. And you probably would have a good way of affecting them if you grabbed a wider variety of spells. Basically, making the most out of spell slots in 2e requires using a wide variety of different spells that work in different ways so you can apply them to whatever situation actually fits them the best. You can't just prepare one overwhelmingly good spell in every single spell slot to use in every single situation. Now, you might be thinking that all of this just applies to spellcasters, but martial characters can still get a lot out of this. Yeah, most of the time, martial characters are just going to be making strikes against armor class, but everyone has access to skills, and skills can target saving throw DCs. For example, you can use Intimidation to apply Frighten to a creature by targeting their will save, or you can trip and grapple a target depending on either their reflex or fortitude DC. Often, you can use a skill to lower someone's defensive abilities to get an advantage, and you can do that more successfully if you target their worst save. So you're still going to have to hit them to actually deal with them in a combat, but you can make that a lot easier if you target their other saving throws that are worse than their armor class. Of course, just saying target their lowest save isn't flawless advice, since often it isn't going to be clear what a creature's worst save is. A lot of the time, it can be a guessing game where you try and predict what will be the most effective, and then hope that you're right. I can absolutely say that it does get easier to try and predict which will be better in any given enemy with time and experience playing 2e, but there aren't many guaranteed ways to know for sure. If you can get access to those though, such as the Battle Assessment Rogue feat, you can make everyone in your party's lives so much easier by removing the guessing and just saying, yeah, target this creature's will save, it sucks. Ultimately, whenever you're fighting enemies below your level, you can pretty much get away with using whatever you want, because you're going to have a way higher bonus and their saving throws are going to be lower, etc., etc. But if you're fighting a single creature that is above your level though, picking your spells with care is incredibly important and massively boosts the effectiveness of spellcasters in those kind of boss fight situations. It's not flawless, and you will get it wrong sometimes, but with practice you can absolutely get better at it, and I mean, it's not flawless, but it's better than just using Electric Arc on an enemy that has a really, really high reflex save. And also, GMs, you should encourage this by giving out saving throw information on Recall Knowledge. Just be careful with that if you have a rogue in the party with Battle Assessment who feels like they might be losing a little bit of that feat. And GMs, you can encourage this if you want by giving out information on saving throws on Recall Knowledge checks if your party is looking for it. And you should also be using this tactic against your party whenever you're playing a smart creature. Just try and avoid using meta information, because you will actually know what saving throws each party member is the worst at. Fighting smarter is equally as important as fighting hard, after all. Thanks for watching. Smart targeting is really important, and somehow I learned that with my first character in 2e who wasn't even a spellcaster, since getting into panache is so important for a swashbuckler, and figuring out whether or not to try and trip or grapple someone was something that I got very good at very fast. Anyways, what is all of your perspectives on this, and do you have any tips for figuring out what saving throw a creature is the worst at? My only advice that I can really give is that generally, if something's big, it's probably got a really good fort save. Well, let me know in a comment down below, and while you're down there, subscribe and consider joining the channel. It's the best way to support me by far. Regardless of that though, until I see you next, live a wonderful life.